For 3 weeks, America fought this war from the sky. Bombers, missiles, airstrikes from carriers nobody could see. Iran knew that game. Iran prepared for that game for 40 years. That game is now over. The United States just sent 2,500 Marines toward the Strait of Hormuz, leading a fleet of amphibious warships, the same type of force that put boots on the ground in Afghanistan in 2001. And Iran has 30 islands sitting right in their path. Everything changes when those Marines arrive. If you watch this video to the end, you will understand exactly what those Marines are going to do, why Iran is more desperate than at any point in this war, and what this deployment means for the oil price that is already hitting your electricity bill and your gas tank right now. This is not another airstrike update. This is the moment the entire war changes shape. Before we get into it, if this channel gives you analysis you cannot find anywhere else, please subscribe and leave a like. It genuinely helps. Now let's go. For 3 weeks, this war looked like a one-sided demolition from above. American B-2 bombers, launched from bases thousands of miles away, dropped massive ordnance penetrators on Iran's most fortified underground facilities. Carrier strike groups in the Gulf launched wave after wave of Tomahawk cruise missiles. Israeli F-35s, invisible to Iranian radar, struck targets across Tehran with a precision that the world had not seen since the opening hours of the Iraq War in 2003. The results were devastating. Iran's air defense network, the system it had spent billions of dollars building over decades and believed would protect it when this moment finally came, collapsed within 72 hours. The nuclear facilities at Natanz and Fordo, sites that Iran had buried under hundreds of meters of reinforced concrete specifically to survive exactly this kind of attack, were destroyed. Supreme Leader Khamenei was killed in the opening wave of strikes. More than 40 of Iran's most critical military and political figures were eliminated in a single coordinated operation. The Revolutionary Guards lost commanders it had spent decades building. Iran's intelligence apparatus lost its most senior figures. The entire top layer of the regime was gone. By every conventional measure, by every military textbook, by every historical precedent the world had to draw on, the war should have been over. But it wasn't. And the reason it wasn't comes down to one thing: the Strait of Hormuz. Even with its military infrastructure in ruins, even with its leadership decapitated, even with its nuclear program physically destroyed, Iran still had a weapon. A 31-mile-wide choke point between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman, through which 20 million barrels of oil flow every single day. 20% of the world's entire oil supply. Passing through a waterway so narrow that you can almost see from one shoreline to the other. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps had been preparing for exactly this contingency for decades. Fast attack boats, small and extraordinarily difficult to target from high altitude, swarmed the strait and attacked commercial vessels attempting to transit. Drones launched from Iran's coastline targeted tankers. Sea mines appeared in the waterway, turning what was already a dangerous passage into a genuine no-go zone for any shipping company that valued its vessels and its crews. The math for commercial shipping companies became very simple, very fast. The potential loss of an oil tanker is worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The revenue from one cargo run is not. The numbers tell the story precisely. Before the war, approximately 150 tankers transited the Strait of Hormuz every single week. Within days of Iran beginning its campaign against commercial shipping, that number collapsed to near zero. Oil prices broke $100 a barrel for the first time since the early 2020s. Insurance premiums for any vessel, even considering the crossing, went through the roof. The world's largest shipping companies issued internal directives to their captains: do not transit. The IRGC's fast boats had done what no amount of diplomatic pressure, economic sanctions, or military threats had managed to do in 4 decades of confrontation with the West. They had effectively closed the world's most important oil waterway. Iran had no nuclear program anymore. It had no functioning air defense system. It had no supreme leader alive to command it. But it had this. And for 3 weeks, this was enough to hold the global economy hostage, until March 14th. On March 14th, multiple outlets, including the BBC and the specialist defense publication The War Zone, reported something that changed the entire strategic picture of this conflict overnight. The United States was sending not just more warships toward the region, but a fundamentally different kind of military force. Leading the deployment is the USS Tripoli, an amphibious assault ship. Behind it, forming an amphibious ready group, are transport dock ships, support vessels carrying equipment, ammunition, and supplies, and 2,500 Marines belonging to the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit, authorized personally by Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth and sailing at maximum speed from their base in Okinawa, Japan. Satellite photographs tracked by open-source intelligence analysts show the USS Tripoli moving through the Bashi Channel between Taiwan and the Philippines, with a wake large enough to indicate it is traveling at full speed. This ship and everything behind it are not moving like a routine deployment. They are moving like a force with somewhere urgent to be. This is not a carrier deployment. This is not more air power. This is boots-on-the-ground capability heading toward a war that everyone assumed was going to stay in the air. If you are getting real value from this breakdown, subscribe to the channel right now. This is what we do here: the analysis behind the headlines, the context that explains what is actually happening and why it matters to you. Let's keep going. To understand why this deployment is Iran's worst nightmare, you need to understand what a Marine Expeditionary Unit actually is and what it is capable of. These are not regular infantry troops. The New York Times describes them as America's 911 force, and that phrase captures exactly what they are: the military capability that the United States calls when it has an urgent, complex problem that needs to be solved immediately with maximum flexibility. A Marine Expeditionary Unit is a self-contained, self-sustaining, rapid-response military organism. It has its own command structure, its own ground combat forces built around a full Marine infantry battalion, with artillery support, reconnaissance assets, combat engineers, and amphibious landing vehicles specifically designed to move forces from ship to shore under hostile conditions. It has its own aviation assets, including transport helicopters, attack helicopters, and the potential to deploy F-35 fighter jets. The USS Tripoli itself has been configured to function as what analysts are already calling an F-35 Lightning carrier, capable of putting stealth fighters in the air over the Strait of Hormuz at any moment. And it has its own logistics to sustain independent operations for weeks without external support. And here is where the history matters in a way that the Iranian regime understands viscerally. The 15th Marine Expeditionary Unit was the first conventional U.S. military force that put boots on the ground in Afghanistan in October 2001. Not special forces operatives inserted quietly in the dark, conventional Marines in an expeditionary unit leading the opening of a ground war. But what does this force actually intend to do when it arrives? Because this is where the picture becomes both clearer and far more alarming for Tehran. There are 4 scenarios currently on the table, and military and intelligence analysts are increasingly noting that they are not mutually exclusive. The United States may pursue any one of them, several of them simultaneously, or all of them in sequence. The first scenario is direct control of the Strait of Hormuz at sea level. Iran's fast boats and drones have been effective for 3 weeks precisely because the U.S. has been fighting this war from high altitude. B-2 bombers, cruise missiles, and carrier-based aircraft are extraordinarily powerful instruments of warfare, but they were not designed for the kind of close, fast, chaotic, small-scale combat that the IRGC's naval forces have been conducting in a 31-mile-wide waterway. Marines, amphibious assault vehicles, and the close air support that an MEU can provide from its own helicopters and F-35s are designed for exactly that environment. The arrival of the 31st MEU gives the U.S. the ability to fight Iran in the Strait at the same level where Iran has been winning. The second scenario is the 30 islands, and this is the one that almost nobody in the mainstream coverage has focused on adequately. Iran controls more than 30 islands scattered across the Persian Gulf. Most people watching the news have never heard of these islands and could not name one of them. But these islands are not just geography on a map. They are the physical infrastructure of Iran's entire naval harassment campaign. Fast boats need somewhere to refuel and rearm between attacks. Drones need launch sites close to the waterway they are targeting. Sea mines need to be deployed from platforms that can reach the shipping lanes. Many of Iran's Persian Gulf islands serve exactly these operational functions, and from an aerial perspective, eliminating them completely has proven extraordinarily difficult. You can bomb a launch site from the air, but if the island remains in Iranian hands, the capability comes back. Amphibious forces are a completely different story. An MEU, supported by its assault ships and landing craft and its own close air support, has the specific capability to conduct amphibious landings on those islands, seize physical control of them, eliminate the infrastructure Iran is using, and hold them. Island by island, the United States could systematically dismantle the physical foundation of Iran's leverage over the Strait of Hormuz. And once those islands are gone, once the IRGC no longer has platforms from which to launch its fast boats and drones into the shipping lanes, Iran's ability to threaten commercial vessels from sea level collapses with them. The third scenario involves Karg Island, and it is the one that carries the highest strategic stakes. Karg Island is not just another island in the Persian Gulf. The Wall Street Journal describes it as Iran's most strategic economic asset, and that description barely captures the reality. Karg Island is the departure point for 90% of Iran's oil exports. It is the infrastructure through which the vast majority of Iran's oil revenues flow. On March 13th, U.S. forces struck military targets on Karg Island for the first time since the war began, but deliberately left Iran's oil infrastructure standing. Trump stated publicly and explicitly that the oil infrastructure on Karg Island would be reconsidered if Iran continued to refuse to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. The arrival of 2,500 Marines and amphibious assault capability within striking distance of the Persian Gulf is the physical embodiment of that threat made real. The move from an airstrike on military targets to an amphibious seizure of Karg Island would not just eliminate Iran's ability to export oil. It would give the United States direct physical control over the single most economically critical piece of infrastructure in the entire country. That is leverage of a completely different order of magnitude than anything air power alone could provide. The fourth scenario is the one that nobody in Washington is officially confirming, but that Bloomberg and several other well-sourced publications have been describing with increasing specificity. A combination of U.S. Marines, CIA operatives, and Mossad intelligence personnel potentially working alongside Iranian opposition groups to build an internal resistance movement capable of challenging the IRGC on the ground, inside Iran itself. When Trump told Iranian citizens in the opening days of the war, "When we are finished, take over your government, it will be yours to take," he was not making a careless remark. He was describing a strategic endpoint, a vision in which American and Israeli military force eliminates enough of the regime's infrastructure and command capability that a sufficiently organized internal opposition can achieve what 3 weeks of the most intense air campaign in modern history has not: change the government from within. A Marine Expeditionary Unit is exactly the kind of force that could provide training, weapons, and direct operational support to such a movement, while simultaneously conducting rapid, flexible operations along the coast and on the islands that keep the IRGC stretched too thin to simultaneously fight an external military threat and suppress a domestic uprising. Iran's new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, who has not appeared publicly since his selection, who has reportedly been evacuated to Moscow for medical treatment after injuries sustained in the opening strikes, who is commanding a war through written statements read aloud by state television anchors, knows all 4 of these scenarios are now physically possible. That is the strategic weight that 2,500 Marines carry simply by existing and moving at maximum speed in the direction of the Persian Gulf. Now let's talk about what this means for the world economy, and for you personally. The Strait of Hormuz has never been just a military problem. From the first day that Iran began attacking commercial shipping, this became an economic emergency that is reaching into the daily lives of hundreds of millions of people who have never thought about the Persian Gulf. The numbers are already at crisis level. Oil is trading above $100 a barrel. Qatar's energy minister has warned publicly that prices could reach $150 a barrel within weeks if the strait remains effectively closed. The International Energy Agency has assessed the current supply disruption as the largest in the recorded history of the global oil market, with approximately 8 million barrels per day removed from available global supply due to the effective closure of the Strait of Hormuz. For Japan, this is an economic emergency, not a geopolitical news story. Japan imports 95% of its oil from the Middle East, and approximately 70% of that passes through the Strait of Hormuz. Every barrel that does not transit the strait either does not reach Japan or reaches Japan through an alternative route that costs significantly more. That additional cost passes directly and immediately to consumers. Higher electricity prices, higher gasoline prices, higher prices on every manufactured product that requires energy to produce or transportation to deliver. For Europe, The situation is compounded by the fact that European energy security was already severely damaged by the disruption of Russian natural gas supplies following 2022. A prolonged Hormuz closure adds a second simultaneous energy shock to economies that have barely stabilized from the first. For the United States, the picture is more complex. America now produces more oil than any other country on Earth, and its domestic supply provides significant insulation from Middle Eastern disruptions. But America cannot insulate itself from the global economic slowdown that happens when its largest trading partners, export markets, and customers are all simultaneously paying dramatically more for the energy that runs their economies. The arrival of the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit changes this economic equation. If those Marines succeed in reopening the Strait of Hormuz, oil prices begin to normalize. The economic pressure on every country connected to the global energy system begins to ease. The bleeding stops. If the Marines face an escalation that the United States did not fully anticipate, the situation could deteriorate significantly before it improves. So let's bring all of this together. For 3 weeks, Iran held the global economy hostage with the one weapon that survived the most devastating air campaign in modern history: fast boats, drones, and sea mines in a 31-mile-wide waterway. No airstrike, no bomber, no carrier-based missile could simply solve that problem from the sky. Then the United States sent 2,500 Marines. Not another airstrike package, not another carrier. A self-contained, amphibious, ground-capable expeditionary force of the exact same type that opened the ground war in Afghanistan in 2001, racing at maximum speed toward a Persian Gulf where Iran controls more than 30 islands and believes it still controls the world's most important oil waterway. 4 scenarios are now on the table simultaneously: sea-level control of the strait, seizure of Iran's Persian Gulf islands, the threat and potentially the reality of Karg Island falling into American hands, and the possibility of U.S. and Israeli operatives connecting with internal Iranian opposition to build a resistance movement that challenges the IRGC from within. Any one of these scenarios would fundamentally alter this war. All of them together would end it. The air war lasted 3 weeks and did not end it. The ground capability is now on its way. Everything changes when those Marines arrive. If this breakdown gave you a clearer picture of what is actually happening and why it matters, please subscribe to the channel and drop a comment below. Do you think the Marines will actually land on Iranian territory? Or will Tehran make a deal before it comes to that? Tell me what you think. See you in my next animated geopolitics video.